take a platoon of BTS and scout the situation on the right flank. If you run into Germans, come back." "Colonel Vasiliev, I think I'll go with him," said Popple. "You command. Don't worry, I'll take all precautions. I want to see with my own eyes what's going on around us. I want to do it the old-fashioned way he grinned with the corners of his eyes, like in the Civil War." I can see from the sour wrinkles in the corners of Vasiliev's mouth that he's not happy about it. But Popple doesn't like to change his mind. Closing the clipboard, he threw it behind his back with a movement of his hand, as if to say, "Well, I'm off." And yet Popple wishes that Vasiliev had understood him correctly. Explaining what it means, as in the Civil War, he says. "Then I saw the enemy with my own eyes. The enemy was all in front of me, and it was clear to me what to do. But now the enemy is in front, behind, and somehow around us. Don't you feel the same way, Colonel?" And he puts his hand on Vasiliev's shoulder in a friendly, gentle manner. The sour wrinkles in the corners of the colonel's mouth disappear. "Yes, yes," he says, and his expression changes rapidly. "You are right, Comrade Brigade Commissar. It's as if we've defeated the enemy, and he's already in our rear. It's burning all around, they're shooting from everywhere. And indeed, it's losing clarity. I too now want to get in the car and be everywhere by myself." "Oh, that's not good," Popple smiles. "You can't do everything yourself. Consider, Colonel, that where I was, you were there too." I agree, but be careful," says Vasiliev. I look at him and don't recognize him. Sometimes I think that Vasiliev is a dry man, but now I want to hug him like a father. I can hardly keep up with Popple. It's hard to keep up with him. He doesn't walk, he rolls. Still, I look at him with a sidelong glance. Now I realize what kind of man he is. Not without reason, I think the front appointed him commander of our unit. Well, Clapper, faster, faster, he urges me on, or we'll miss the kingdom of heaven." The mines are no longer exploding in the forest. Now they burst somewhere in front of us, and on the right we hear the rumble of engines and frequent shots of tank 45mm guns. It seems that Bolkovitinov started the attack. Seeing me and Popple, the crews jump up. I indicate to the commanders of the cars of the 1st platoon the route of movement along the road to a large village on the right. But Popple calls me and says, "Change the route, we'll follow the attackers, then turn and move on Pelcher." "Sorry, Comrade Brigade Commissar," I say, "if the attack fails, we'll have to go back to get to the crossing. It's a pity if we waste our time." Claptrap, learn to believe in what is intended. If we decide to attack, we'll succeed. Let's go like this. And Popple climbed into the turret of his car. We're moving out into the field. On the left flank, Mazarziev's T-26 battalion has just separated from the forest, and on the right fast-moving BT-7s of the 2nd Battalion, having broken forward, are already approaching the outskirts of the village, where smoke is rising above the hut burnt by the Germans. The tracks of the tanks are drawing straight lines in the high rye, as on a sheet of a school notebook. German mines and shells are bursting in front and behind the advancing. I can see that their gunners are quite nervous. I hear the flight of armor-piercing shells. Why not a single shot from our column? The tanks are silently rushing towards the village. I am using binoculars, looking for the outskirts of the village. There it is not the slightest movement, not a single target. But does it mean that there's no need to shoot? After all, the enemy is there, even if you can't see him, but he's there, he's shooting. I understand that our crews are trying to get to the melee as soon as possible. No one wants to shoot at random. Everyone is looking for the right target. When I participated in the attacks, it seemed to me too that it was possible to discharge the gun only at a spotted target. But now when I ride behind the attackers and see their attack from the side, it seems to me that fire from the move is necessary. And it makes me angry that people are not sorry for themselves, but sorry for the shell. I catch up with Maziev's battalion at the junction with the 2nd and, slowing down, ride behind it. Next to it to the left is Popple's tank. From under the hatch cover, elevated above the turret, the commissar is carefully watching the attack. Armor-piercing shells are flying overhead. I'm angry at Popple too. Not only did he follow the attackers when we could have bypassed the bridge, but he was sticking his head above the turret. Ahead of us, a T-26 burst into flames. The Q is behind us, me or him? I stomp my foot on both shoulders of Viper sitting below as a sign of the command maneuver, on the course maneuvering and mechanic Poplar, throwing his tank from side to side. Overtaking the whole formation, the T-26 rushes forward. The head of a tanker can be seen above the turret. He is continuously waving a flag in the direction of movement, signalling forward faster. I recognize him as Captain Mazaev. I share his impatience. Several tanks are already burning. If we had opened fire on the gardens at once, maybe these burning tanks wouldn't be there. The fast-moving BT-7s were already on the outskirts of the village. They were firing hurricane gun and machine gun fire when some German artillerymen, before running away, recognized the commander's vehicle by its signals. A shot erupted from a barn, the first on my course. Captain Mazaev disappeared inside the tank. The tank went up in smoke, but without slowing down, continued to rush toward the village. Fire on the barn, I decided, and lowered myself into the turret. But I was overtaken by another tank. He flew towards the barn, firing at it from the run. When I saw that the barn was on fire and the gun crew scattered around the garden, I couldn't resist shouting, "Well done. He saved Mazaev." I was seized with excitement. Having fallen down to the telescopic sight, I shot through the village at the German column of vehicles stretching along the ridge and in panic moving away in the direction of Pelcher. The Germans don't answer. I look out of the hatch. T-26, which knocked down the cannon, is flying towards Mazaev's tank, which is on fire, but continues to rush. Here they are getting closer. The tank that is coming towards Mazaev's turns around and approaches him side by side. A tanker jumps out of the turret hatch. One jump and he is on Mazaev's tank, hiding in its smoking turret. The burning tank continued to move for a few more seconds and finally stopped at the very shed. I rushed there, jumped out, ran to help the daredevil. I think, who is he? A pale, bloody driver falls out of the mechanic's hatch, bends over at the waist, gets stuck in the hatch, helplessly rubs his face, skinning it against the nose-sloping sheet of armor, slowly crawls down. I guess someone is pushing him out. I carefully lift the lifeless body, pull it up and lower it to the ground. Frolov looks out of the hatch. So that's who this brave man is. "I'll give you more. Help me." He shouts to me, gasping for breath. "Come on, come on," I shout. We pull out the killed turret man, severely wounded Mazaev and mechanic. Then Nikitin and I help to get out of the tank, half suffocated in smoke. Frolov. He can barely stand, staggering like a drunk. Popple comes running up. "Well, Eagles?" he asks. Frolov reports to him. From behind someone shouts, "Where to now?" I hear heavy breathing and the stomping of runners. I turn around. A young junior lieutenant is running with 2 soldiers, and behind them, about 100 paces away, is a sparse chain of 60 to 70 men. "Where to now? Where is the commander with the flags?" he asks on the run. His eyes are sunken, his face is flooded with sweat. On his broad chest and shoulder blades, white spots of salt. Seeing the signal flags, lying at the feet of prostrate on the ground Mazaev, he stops amazed, then turns to the lagging chain and, waving his cap, shouts, "Hurry, hurry, hurry." "What army?" Popel is surprised. "Where did it come from?" "What army?" The junior lieutenant, hardly catching his breath, is indignant, but then he notices the diamonds on Popel's buttonholes and is lost. Although a dead comrade and 2 seriously wounded were lying nearby, it was impossible to refrain from smiling at the sight of how embarrassed the junior lieutenant was. Comrade Brig. Doesn't know how to say it either, Brig or Brig Commissar. Brig Commissar, Popel grinned and helped him. "We are a regiment." From Rava. What a regiment, I thought, looking at the approaching bunch of infantrymen. The junior lieutenant cheered up and began to report. "We were defeated this morning. I gathered up the survivors, retreated through the woods. Here we came across the tanks of this commander." He pointed to Mazaev. "He told us, 'Let's go to the attack, help us.' So I led the men after him. But how can you keep up with the tanks? We're a little behind, we're getting tired. No, we're not behind, said Popel, shaking his hand. There's no reason for the infantry to be ahead of the tanks. And shining his face, as if it had suddenly fallen into some unusually bright light, shouted to the infantrymen, "Well done, boys. Eagles." He took out a notebook, asked the name of the junior lieutenant, wrote it down on a blank sheet of paper, and said, "And now fight with the new combatant, hero of the Soviet Union, Lieutenant Frolov. Here he is. Don't lose sight of him. Yes, I saw you stopped Mazayev's tank, but why, having caught fire, it kept going?" Popel asked, addressing Frolov. "I knew that he would not stop on his own," Frolov replied. "A day or two ago I heard Mazayev's mechanic tell my mechanic that his machine would never stop on the battlefield, even if they ripped out his heart. Before the attack, he puts the handle constant throttle at high engine speed, and in this case the tank in a straight line moves without a mechanic. That's why I knew it was Mazayev's car, and shut down the engine. Otherwise the crew could not have been saved." Dobre, clapper. "You've done a good deed," said Popel, patting Frolov affectionately on the shoulder, and bending down to Mazayev felt his pulse. "Well, Grandfather Mazay." "Oh, well done. His pulse is beating like a clock. A lot of blood was sucked out of him, and he swallowed a lot of smoke. That's why he went crazy." He straightened up. "Well, new commander, the wounded on the tank, and to the regiment. And you go on and fulfill the task." I look at the wounded tankers, at Frolov, at the departing handful of infantry, and warmly and joyfully becomes on a soul from consciousness that around me such people. "Well, let's go," said Popel and laughed. The Germans to the left, and we to the right. For convenience of communication, he settled down in my car, took the place of the Bashna. I sent Nikitin down to the mechanic. 2 patrol cars are going forward. We drive to the north, come out on the field road, and, jumping from grove to grove, hurry to the highway from Pelcha to Dubno. We pass the second village, behind it begins a grove, along the edge of which wheat is sprouting. In the wheat, glimpses of pilots. I inform Popel about it, turn around and stop. He orders. "Let's find out who these people are." Having warned the patrol cars, we turn to the grove. I look at the wheat swaying in the breeze, and there's no one there. "Like in the water," says Popel, grinning. "I wondered if I imagined it." "Well, here they are, my lovebirds," Popel says confidently. "They just mistook us for Germans, so they went into the wheat. Now cover this peaceful landscape." "I don't understand," I ask. "How to cover it like that?" Come on. Why are you embarrassed? Cover the field side by side." "Well, I think, and the stupidest position. I won't get anything out of it, I'm not a master." Turning towards the forest, where, most likely, the fighters could have gone, I shouted. "Hey, who's there? Come out!" "You're not in church, you're on the battlefield," Popel grinned. "Lord have mercy won't help. Stronger, and simpler. You need to strike a nerve, shout cowards. That's it." Popel encourages me, "That's a long, and now across." But I don't need any more encouragement. I'm getting into the excitement. I'm cutting both lengthwise and crosswise at once. A flock of rooks flies out of the grove with noise, and 200 meters away from us someone's head in a cap peeks out cautiously from the wheat. Suddenly the man stood up and silently moved towards us. "It worked," Popel laughs. "Look out now, you see, he's offended at being called a coward. He's coming like a bear, and he's holding a grenade behind his back, thinking he can't see. Warn him, or he'll give you a treat. Oh, you greens, you haven't practiced war yet. You don't know the psychology of the Russian man." They're ours. I shout. "They steal chickens, too," the suitable one answers angrily. "Who are they? Password, or I'll throw you to hell." And he stops about 30 meters away, taking a pose convenient for throwing a grenade. "What's the password?" "Whose password?" "Neither he nor we know any password. I notice a full saw of triangles on his buttonholes. I think I'll frighten you now, I shout. Hey, petty officer, are you blind or what? You see, the brigade commissar is in front of you. Come on over here. He comes and stops 5 steps away from us, still holding one hand behind his back. He is wearing blue galifes and a new gymnast jacket, tied with a Portuguese belt. His cap is pushed down on the back of his head. His eyes are red and inflamed. Come closer, Thomas the Unbeliever. Come and make sure Popple invited. Petty Officer Raven, he introduced himself to Popple. Only we don't have to be afraid. Our fear is all gone, Comrade Bricommissar. From Sunday until today we have been fighting in our outfit. We haven't had time to change. He blew his field whistle and whistled long. 2 soldiers appeared above the wheat. Following them, groups of fighters began to rise here and there all over the field. There were 50 men in all. Wow! Popple exclaimed. So you have, Raven, a whole regiment. That's right, it is a regiment. Only remnants. We're retreating from the border town of Sokal. Of the commanders, the regiment commander is left, but he's wounded. We carry him with us. Now he's lying on the edge of the forest. Where are the Germans? On the highway through that village, he pointed to Pelcher. They're heading south. That's what? Raven, said Popple. Gather your men and fly to our nest. Bring the regiment commander there too. You'll fight together with the tanks. Look here. Popple took out a map. You'll find our men at the edge of the forest here, against the village of Podluze. Got it? Give the note to Colonel Vasiliev. But don't be late, the deadline is 3 hours. We'll be there, we'll be there. The soldiers who surrounded us shouted in unison. Now it's easier to go against the devil, not like against the German, with tanks, someone said. Round, commanded the petty officer. To the forest, run. We caught up with the patrol, gave it the task to approach stealthily to the highway, to find out where the Germans were moving, to open fire and, having caused panic, to move back to us. The patrol went off along the sides of the road, with the core of the reconnaissance slowly moving behind him, without losing sight of him. Here, Comrade Senior Lieutenant, says Popple, switching to you, don't be surprised that I made you bypass the censorship. The Russian man is peaceful until you make him angry, and when you make him angry, hold on. The petty officer, was thinking of throwing a grenade at us. This one's already angry. But not all of them. Many of them don't have hatred anger. You can't fight without it, no. It was like that in the Civil War, and so it will be in this war. If our people get angry, they will rise up and march, and nothing you can do will stop them. I listened to him, and I remember our good-natured curiosity about the first 2 prisoners at Peremyshal. I remember how the tankers treated them with everything that a soldier is rich in during a campaign. The only bad thing is, he continues, that there are many gaps in our combat training. Isn't it a shame that a petty officer didn't recognize his own Soviet tank today? You'll be alive, don't forget it. Take it all in your stride, what you'll see in the war. Ahead of us, the sentries opened gun and machine gun fire. It is intertwined with the frequent squawking of German large-caliber machine guns. Open fire, give for panic. Orders me, Popple. Having turned the cars towards the highway, we open fire, hitting through the grove at random. The patrol cars are coming back. They report that German tanks, artillery vehicles are moving along the highway. They shoot back and, without delay, go further south. They wounded one of our turrets. Go back, Popple commands. It's clear. The Germans had a clever plan, but in practice they got stupid. They expected to split our defence into 2 isolated parts by simultaneous strikes from the west and from the south on the village of Teacher. But nothing came out of the simultaneity. The western grouping is broken by our surprise attack. The Germans still attack Paicha and from the south, but now it's too late. Vasiliev has already managed to transfer to Teacher 1 Battalion Bolkovitinov. In addition, the Howitzer Artillery Division and a battalion of motorized riflemen of Gerasimov's Met Division, which had broken through to us, came up here. Having returned from reconnaissance, Popple quickly built a deeply echeloned defence on the Verba Teacher section. Howitzer Artillery Division, under the command of the brave old colonel, became on the heights north of Picher, and the motorized rifle battalion took the line on the southern edge of the village along the creek and north to Triton inclusive. Despite the fivefold superiority of the Germans in tanks and artillery, 2 successive attacks did not bring them decisive success. The attacks were smothered in the depths of the anti-tank defense knot created by Popel. Seeing the obvious futility of further attacks, the Germans were forced by evening to take up defences on the northern outskirts of the village of Verba. Popel again moved with his headquarters in Podluza, occupied one of the gardens. My company settled down in the neighbouring garden. I was confused that during the whole day we were not disturbed by German aviation. The Germans were advancing without air support. Their Junkers and Heinkel's echelons went to the south, to the place where Ryabyshev with 2 divisions remained. Only in the evening, during the last German attack, German Crutch's reconnaissance planes appeared above us. Nearby in the house sat a prisoner from the headquarters of the 14th Division Milche, a talkative major. Even yesterday I had time to talk to him about the organization of German tank units. Now I decided to ask him something about aviation. Why today your planes are flying forward in such masses without paying attention to us? I asked him. It is very simple, he answered me. Our High Command keeps all the bomber aviation in their hands centralized. Where it is necessary to strike in the main directions or on your reserves, it all rushes there, and here you get a lot of airplanes over you. Oh, it's getting strong, very strong. Then all our tanks move forward. So today the aviation accompanied your units to Kremenets? I asked. Oh, yes. And when we will be bombed? I joked, but he answered seriously. The scouts will report the data. After them, the bombers will come. The scouts were here tonight, I said. That alarmed him. I ask you to tell the general. We must all leave the village. From the small forest too, he worried. I passed my conversation with the major to the commander, who reported it to Popel. The German is right. By all indications tomorrow will be hot, but we have nowhere to go, said Popel. Active actions of our detachment greatly worried the Germans. During June 28th, they attacked 3 times on Dubno. They're crossing. I think. Krivulia must have already passed, he should have gone first. Will we meet again? The Germans obviously detected the crossing. Shells and mines methodically whistle over the river. By the sound of the rupture, it is easy to determine where the shell bursts on the dry bank. It seems to quack with pleasure in the swamp. The shell bursts long, with a whistle, smacking muffled, displeased slapping into the water. It raises an invisible fountain of water, which the dark sky returns to the river, breaking in it the reflection of the Milky Way. Ducks quack anxiously on the other bank, and somewhere farther to the right, in the village, geese cackle treacherously. Don't delay. I hear Popel's voice, and another car, with a muffled engine murmur, pulls the howitzer onto the bridge. Popel and Vasiliev are standing next to the T-34 tank at the very exit to the bridge. Somewhere there, and Colonel Artilleryman. I can't see him, I only hear his voice. The division has passed. He reports. Good, Colonel. We wish you good luck. Remember that on the other shore during the night you have to measure 60 kilometers. We'll get through, says the Colonel, and I see his armoured car, carefully going over the timbers of the deck, enters the bridge. We are hit by a series of explosions. Nearby, a whole volley lies in the river. An explosion and a violent splash of water is seen on the bridge. A muffled shriek, and again the engines rumble quietly, and the timbers of the deck rattle under passing vehicles. A wet fighter runs up to us. He reports to Popel that a shell hit the Colonel's armoured car. The armoured car rolled over the bridge into the water, and the Colonel drowned with the car. I cannot believe this, just as I cannot believe that Frolov and Peripolitsa were killed. It seems to me that whenever I think of these people, I will remember them as if they were alive. It is difficult, simply impossible, to imagine them dead. The gathering of all the tanks was in Podluga. We left there when the Big Dipper had just turned its tail to the earth, but before morning we had made only 10 kilometers, we reached Mala Milch. This is explained by the fact that in a column of 100 tanks 9 different brands of vehicles. The column goes in 3 echelons. In the first 2 echelons all kinds of tanks from tankets to heavy KV. Only Volkov's 3rd echelon is of the same type T-34. Popel and Vasiliev with their reserve move in the head of Bolkovitinov's regiment, the 1st echelon of the column. My tanks are behind Popel's KB. All are moving at reduced distances, as the terrain here is very rough and the road runs along a stream in a narrow gully. This is a real defile, and very favourable for an enemy ambush. Before the march Popel warned us about it, demanding that everyone should be especially attentive. A German battery on the left struck us with a ringing sound, and a battery on the right repeated in a nasal voice. The ridges sheltered us from shells. But only I thought if they hit us from the front, it will be a ghost story, as a German battery hit us from the front. Sparks spattered from the KB Popel ahead of us in 2 places. It won't penetrate, I thought. But what would happen to my tank if Popel turned away from the road? Popel didn't swerve. Adding gas, gaining more and more speed, his tank left Vasiliev's tank far behind him. Vasiliev stopped, and I heard him order Volkov to turn around and attack the village as soon as possible. But we couldn't wait. Before Volkov, going in the 3rd echelon, attacks half of the column drawn into the defile will be clogged in it. The first 2 echelons can no longer turn to attack. Popel immediately realized the danger to us. That is why he rushed alone to attack the battery, which missed our head marching outpost and only then opened fire along the gully. If he managed to draw all the fire of this battery and then destroy it, the column will skip this cursed place, and at the village itself, where the battery is firing from, will turn to attack. All this became clear to me as soon as I saw that Popel had gone on the attack. From the sound of the shots, it sounded like 45mm anti-tank guns were hitting. Will the KBs penetrate or won't penetrate until he sees them, I thought. The shells of the Popelu cannon began to burst in the shrubbery beside the road, and I exclaimed joyfully, "I have seen them." Nikitin almost immediately shouted, "A cannon has been hit." Diving into the shrubbery, Popel's tank raised its nose up and then lowered again, as if overcoming an obstacle. "On the right second," reported Nikitin. KB Popel's KB was already turning its nose there. The cannon at point-blank range shot at him, and at the same moment disappeared under the tracks of the tank. To the left were 2 more cannons. One of their shells would have penetrated my tank through both sides, but against KB they are powerless, only sparks shoot out of his turret. I still want to help him, but I don't have time. KB turns around in a large radius and smothers, one by one, both frantically yapping guns. Now I have only one wish: to get out of this damned defile as soon as possible. Behind me, Bolkovitinov's regiment rushes out, immediately turning into battle order. I try to catch up with Popel's tank, which has gone forward again. He is obviously taking a course to the right, towards the houses, towards the battery, which has transferred the fire on our tanks deploying for the attack. Popel and his loader, the chief of the special department of the corps, appear above the turret. Both are cheerful, shouting something to each other, pointing to the right. Having looked back, Popel shakes his head, apparently surprised that the column is just turning to attack, and throws out the signal forward, pointing to the village. The German battery, which had been firing from the right side of the village, shifts its fire to the tanks approaching it. By the clanking sound of the shot, I recognize a 75mm anti-tank gun. I hurry to get away from the open place to the houses, so that, covered by them, to approach the battery. Popel's tank, far behind the others, is also heading that way. He had already fired at the battery. Aha! There it is. A shell bursts in the garden. I point my gun there, and suddenly I see no less than a company of German tanks in the street opposite me. They go between me and Popel's tank, coming in his tail. I open fire from both my tanks. The Germans in panic do not notice who is firing. Their tanks crawl back into the village. I keep firing at them. The commissar is on fire. Nikitin shouts. I look around. Poppel's tank is standing, its stern is shrouded in ever-expanding clouds of smoke. On it almost at point-blank range of guns. Too late. We'll cover it with fire, I think, and leaving alone the German tanks retreating deep into the village, I open fire on the battery from one of my tanks and send the second to Poppel. But Vasiliev's KB was ahead of us. He flashed through the vegetable gardens behind the buildings in the direction from which the German battery was firing. It suddenly quieted down, and KB, ducking out from behind the house, came to Poppier's burning tank. As we hurried there, we saw that Poppel had fooled the Germans this time too. His tank was hit only the track, not the tank was burning, but the smoke bomb on the stern. Vasiliev gave Poppel his tank and himself moved to the headquarters KV. Having joined in one group, we caught up our battle orders behind the village of Mala Milcha. Here our attack was smothered. On the left, from the edge of the forest, and on the right, from the village of Pelsia, the German tanks were firing cannon fire so frequently that it seemed to be machine guns of cannon caliber. Judging by the intensity of the fire and by the mass advance of tanks on the outskirts of Pelcha, in front of us was no less than a tank division of the enemy. "Here you are without shells, here you are without fuel," said Poppel to Vasiliev, when, having come under heavy crossfire, we withdrew behind the outermost hut of the village. "Yes," replied Vasiliev, "and it seems to be over 400. "And yet the order of the front must be carried out," said Poppel. "It will be carried out," replied Vasiliev. Poppel orders Novikov to stay on the southern edge of the village and collect the tanks coming from the march to the reserve of the detachment commander, and Bolkovitinov with all the tanks that are available here, to attack Pelcha. "We can't delay," says Poppel. "We must get ahead of them," and he points to the north. Even without binoculars, you can clearly see how a German tank column is moving along the highway from west to east. "I see, Comrade Brigade Commissar, ready to attack," says Bolkovitinov. "I wish you good luck, comrades," says Poppel, addressing Vasiliev and Bolkovitinov. "Look for it ahead. There is no turning back for us," and he, jumping on his tank, gives the mechanic driver Petty Officer Korovkin the command forward. His KB, unhappily snorting the engine, took a course to the left 45 degrees, to the edge of the forest, from where the Germans were frantically firing. Mechanic Korovkin, easily manoeuvring along the course, successfully chooses hiding places, and his daring and non-stop advance more and more attracts more and more enemy fire. My tank, as a liaison, is following the KV. More than a dozen shells have already fired from Poppel's tank, but it is still rushing towards the forest. Under the impression of this unstoppable movement of KB, I forget about the danger for my thin-walled machine, which grows with each step of approaching the enemy. But this danger is not forgotten by my mechanic. Viper leads our tank at the very stern of the invulnerable KB. Now I understand Poppel's intention. He wants to cut off the withdrawal of German tanks to Pels, to squeeze them between the forest and our tanks going to the right. The Germans realized it too late. Convinced of their powerlessness to stop a heavy Soviet tank rushing at them, they tried to rush through the edge of the forest to the village. Then Poppel's cannon started talking, and mine with it. The first tank, which tried to rush through the edge of the forest, burst into flames. The second suffered the same fate. The others turned back and went somewhere in the woods, into a clearing, I guess. Ahead I see Germans running behind the bushes and flashes, after which sparks fall from the left side of the KB. Battery on the left, Nikitin directs me. I shoot at the nearest bush. Without delay, I transfer the sight to another suspicious bush, but there is no need for cannon fire there. KB Poppier closes this bush from my sight with his huge body, crushes it under himself. 3 Germans jump out as hares. 2 of them raise their hands up, and the third, bending over, fiddles with a round anti-tank mine. Smoke is streaming above it. It will throw on the stern, I think, and I see the movement of the German towards the slowly unfolding KV. I do not have time to shoot from the machine gun, as from a clearing in the side of the KB strikes a shell, cutting sparks. The second bursts in front of the German, who has already stepped with a mine in his hands to the stern of the tank Poppel. Having stumbled, the German settles on the ground with a mine in his hands at the very nose of my tank, which Gadiuchka slowed down in order not to crash into the stern of the KB. To the right, forward, quickly. I command Viper. My light tank is spinning. An explosion from behind throws up the stern and throws the tank forward. I hit the back of my head on the radio. When my head cleared and I leaned out of the turret, I was showered with earth rain. A large crater was smoking near the bush where the German artillerymen stood with their hands up in the air. From a mine in the hands of a German exploded, I guessed. A newly fired KB gun made me turn in its direction. On the right, between the trees of the clearing, a third German tank was burning. Poppel, who did not know what threatened his tank, who did not see what happened behind him, was now hitting the fourth German tank, which was moving deeper into the clearing. After the shot of his gun, a slender tree, cut down by a shell, fell off. In the resulting clearing, the cross on the side of the German tank that had stopped against us glowed. At the same moment I saw the cannon of another German tank peeking out from behind a bush. 4 shots rang out simultaneously. In the heat of the moment I fired 2 more and, leaning out of the hatch, was struck by the unfamiliar sight of the KV turret. Popel, also out of the hatch, was laughing and showing something to his turret man. I drove up close to Popel's tank. "Damn it, the barrel with the shell flew away," said Popel. Turret turned to me, gaping hole in the turret, and I realized that the barrel of the gun is broken off at the very base. No more Germans were seen or heard on the edge of the forest, but more and more tank cannon shots were heard on our right. There, not far along the field, Staff KV. Vasiliev led the battle order of our tanks in the attack on Pelcha. When we returned to Malamilchu, all the tanks and infantrymen who had fallen behind on the march had already pulled up here, among whom I saw the Chubati petty officer Voron with his regiment, and the carless tanker Udalov, and volunteer collective farmers Musia and Ignat. Musia is already in a tanker's leather jacket, belted with a cartridge case, but he still does not part with his felt hat, which he waved to me from afar. Somewhere in the village was Vasiliev's headquarters, but no one knew where. The chief of the political department, Novikov, and Sitnik, the chief of staff of the Bolkovite regiment, commanded everything. In fact, Sitnik for several days has been performing the duties of the self-deployed, confused chief of staff. This position passed to him by itself. There was an empty seat. It was necessary to fill immediately. The situation demanded, and Major Sitnik did it without waiting for an order. Probably many more new people will be promoted in the same way from the second ranks to the first. Who are these people? I don't think they were born for war, as they say sometimes, just that these men do their duty with an unswerving faith in success. We caught Sitnik and Novikov together. They were both standing on the Klun, watching the edge of the forest west of Belt Milch, from where a battery of German regimental cannons had begun to beat on the village. "I have no luck today, 2 tanks from under me Germans knocked out," said Popel, after listening to Sitnik's report. "Give me a 30 Sheveka, let's shut their throats there." He nodded his head in that direction, from where the German battery was beating. A few minutes later, Petty Officer Voron's regiment, commanded by Novikov, went into the forest. Regiment attacked the battery from deep in the forest. At Novikov's rocket signal attack, Popel jumped on a new 30 checkered. What happened next? And now I still do not quite clearly imagine. When, following the stern of Popel's tank, we reached the edge of the forest, I saw Uncle Musia. He hugged the barrel of a German gun and shouted, calling the fighters to him. "Let's turn them, boys, with their faces to the Nimshura, so maybe they will serve better." Nearby Raven and several men were turning the second cannon. Nobody paid attention to the fact that some other German battery had already shifted its fire to us. "Oh, comrades, there are enough shells for 2 days of shelling," Popel shouted from his turret. "Novikov, Novikov," he called out, "you'll be the main gunner here. Here is your anti-tank node. Suppress the firing battery and then hit the tanks advancing and retreating. The place is important. Don't let the Germans get to our rear." When Popel ordered me to rush to Pelchu, to Vasiliev, to tell him that he would now take the reserve tanks and come to his aid, that all the German guns were already our gunners, Among them were the chairman of the divisional tribunal, the chief of the special department, the division prosecutor. Petty Officer Voron with his regiment occupied the defence around the battery. You will remember the chief of the division staff looking out of the tank in a confused way, and the chief of the division intelligence, who never knew anything about what was going on around us, and you will think, where did such pathetic chickens come from in a flock of eagles? The success that accompanied us all the first half of the day changed us in the second half of it. The remnants of Bolkovitinov's and Volkov's regiments, led by Vasiliev, which had driven the Germans from Pelcha to the north, came under a flank attack of German tanks advancing from Buda in several echelons, went into a counter-attack, and suffered very heavy losses. By evening, Vasiliev pulled all surviving tanks to the edge of the forest. Popel also came here with a reserve. I'm looking at Popel and Vasiliev. Is there any danger that our plan will not be executed? It's a matter of life or death for the whole squad. Despite the heavy setback that has befallen us, there is not a shadow of worry on their faces. It seems to me only that Vasiliev looks more solemn and Popel more focused than usual. They are preparing a final, decisive attack. Tanks are lined up in battle order, and behind them in the depths of the edge infantry. We are waiting for the German tanks to come at us from the left, from Bud, on a clear field, in order to defeat them with one quick blow in the open and break out of the compressed ring on the route of the planned raid. The sun is already sloping toward sunset, and the Germans are still slow. In these minutes of languid waiting, we learn about the death of Volkov. He was killed by an accidental shell during reconnaissance when he was watching the Germans regrouping with binoculars. This sad news makes the expectation of battle even more burdensome. Finally, from the north side, from behind Pelcha, comes a deafening gun rumble, and it is echoed by the same rumble from the south. In front of our edge, the earth rises into the air, falls, and in the rays of the setting sun it seems as if it were streams of blood falling from the sky. They hit an empty place for fear. Nikitin encourages me. No, it's not for fear. It's a barrage against our attack. They're under the cover of it on both sides of the German tanks came out. German artillery transfer fire deep into the forest. Here it is, the last and decisive with solemnity, says Vasiliev, climbing on the tank, and gives the signal gathering of commanders to me. I don't know whether it seems to me now, when the terrible thing has happened, or whether my heart really shrank in a longing premonition of it. Nikolai Kirillovich, for the first time Vasiliev called Popel by name and patronymic, I want not only to set a task, I want to talk to those who may not return. Speak, said Popel quietly, and I, hearing the unusual intonation in his voice, thought how good it is that we all understand each other with all our being. From the distant vehicles to the group that encircled the tank commander, rushing and tankers and infantrymen, the slender figure of Vasiliev, draped in a black leather tanker's uniform, exactly merges with the turret. With flags in his hand, stretched out to the sullen lava of German tanks rushing towards us, with his head pointed forward, looking at the enemy, illuminated by the last rays of the sun, this is how I will remember him all my life. Tankers, comes his strong and steady voice. Look, here he is, the enemy, who is coming to enslave the Soviet people. The honour of the fatherland is our honour. In this decisive hour, we'll stand for it as our fathers did, for our just cause. Hooray for the man for whom our life is famous. To Comrade Stalin, picks up Popel, who was already next to Vasiliev. Hurrah! We shout from below. The echo of our mighty hurrah rolls across the flat field towards the advancing enemy. We run to the cars. Someone on the run shouts, "Hurry for our commanders." And again the battle cry of the Russian people rolls far and wide. Do you hear us, motherland? Vasiliev is leading the last 3 KVs in the centre of the battle order. Popel is again on the T-34 somewhere on the flank. Our tank goes close to the stern of Vasiliev's KB, which is heading west, bypassing the village of Pelcha on a clear field. The enemy's frequent fire resembles the beat of drums. I look through the periscope and see clouds of earth and German tanks rising at bursts and settling. They are rolling in strict rows, leading the infantry. Wherever I turn my periscope, everywhere German tanks. In a semicircle from the north and south, they've cordoned us off. Forward. Forward signalled the commander, and his car sharply breaks out of the line. The tanks fly after him at top speed. Only thin-walled T-28, deliberately retired, are firing from short stops. KB Vasiliev, freezing for a moment, hits at point-blank range on the oncoming avalanche. I shoot from behind his stern and immediately see the result of the first shot. It's hard to miss at 500 meters. Sparks fall from the KB turret. From its sides, shell after shell hit it, bounce like peas off the wall. One German tank, having broken forward, rushes at Vasiliev. The commander doesn't waste a shell on it, rams the impertinent one with his nose. The German tank's turret falls off. Now all KBs are huddled together with Vasiliev. The hatch cover is lifted, his head is shown, the flags are waved the signal forward. At the same moment a bundle of dazzling sparks bounces off his turret, followed by a second one from the left side. The tank shuddered and stopped. Flames burst out of the half-open hatch and burst into the sky with a candle. Not believing the periscope, I look out of the turret and don't want to believe myself. KB is on fire. No one shows up from the hatches. I waited with a frozen heart. Vasiliev's head was about to appear. No, he doesn't. It's clear everything is over, and yet I don't believe it. Another light flashes. What the hell is that? Why are they burning all of a sudden? I turn my periscope away from Vasiliev's tank. On the heights near the village I can see long-barreled guns. Anti-aircraft guns. I have a hunch. That's who could have penetrated the KB. I take aim. The flames hit my eyes, my head rings. I can't move. Why is my body so heavy all of a sudden? Someone pulls me up into the air, then drags me along the ground. I can hardly lift my eyelids. I am in a trench. My head rests on someone's body. I roll my eyes, my glasses with one cracked glass sticking out wildly on my face covered with earth. Professor, I remember. Somewhere behind me above my head, cannons are firing intolerably loudly, over and over again, each shot echoing in my body with a terrible, deafening pain, and I hear someone's familiar voices. Alive, says Nikitin. Vasiliev is alive, I think, and finally come to my senses. I see Petty Officer Raven, bandaging his blood-soaked face. I guess that I'm on Novikov's battery. Having tucked up the bandages, Voron falls to the handle of the tank machine gun and fires short bursts at someone. Single soldiers quickly jump over the trench, shells often burst around, and somewhere below roar and squeal engines. Could it be German tanks, I think, and try to raise my head, look out of the trench. Not far away in the grey shadow of the evening forest burns a German tank. Farther away, in the side, burning 4 more tanks. Through the rumble of shots and bursts I hear Novikov's command. Each gun to fire behind the battery. Direct fire. At the fascist scum, fire. And the fire of the battery merged into one continuous rumble. But where is Nikitin? I heard his voice. Where's Vasiliev, I thought. It turns out that Nikitin next to me, in the trench. Alive. He smiles. Later I learned that after Vasiliev's death our tanks, continuing the unequal battle, drove the Germans back into the forest to Budum and Pelchu. But we had to abandon the further task. We had too few tanks left. Gathering carless tankers and infantry, Popel took them to the forest under the cover of Novikov's battery. Nikitin and Gadiuchka went with them, taking me out of the battlefield. On the way they were caught by an artillery attack, and they took cover in Raven's trench. Howling engines are getting closer. Nikitin and Gadiuchka, without saying a word, suddenly pick me up under the arms and drag me into the forest. A strong shaking, and this time had a revitalizing effect on me. Feeling that my feet were firmly anchored to the ground, I broke free and ran on my own. Several medium and light tanks, sent by Popel to help Novikov, who was repulsing the second attack of German tanks, raced towards us. On the eastern edge of the forest we saw many men of our detachment. They crowded in 5 different places and for some reason shouted their ranks and surnames. In the middle on a stump sat Popel, and next to him stood Major Sitnik and reported something to him. Having learned that this is the formation of 5 companies from the surviving BS Machinier tanks and the remnants of motorized infantry, we went to the company in which we saw our old acquaintances. After roll call, Popple counted the forces. There were 1,750 men left in the detachment, armed with anything from a grenade to a tank machine gun, about 50 wounded and 15 tanks. I heard an interesting conversation between Popple and his machine-less mechanic Korovkin. "Comrade Brigade Commissar, how are we going to fight now?" asked the mechanic. Popple understood him at once. "In the same way as we fought with machines by crew," he said. Apparently Korovkin was not alone in fearing that in a foot formation the crews would be mixed up, the inseparable friends' colleagues would end up in different units. Popple's answer flew around in a flash. "It's good that the crews are on foot." The tankers started talking excitedly. "So, I'm ahead again?" Korovkin asked. "Of course you'll trample the road," Popple smiled. At dusk Popple led us through the woods to the village of Paichur to use the bridge to cross the river. Ikva to Staro Nosovica. It seems that he intended to break through the Ikva marshes to the east. I, as platoon commander of the 1st Company, was given the task of going in the lead marching guard. It was already dark when I led my platoon out of the forest to the outskirts of the village of Perchin, where our T-34 tank stood at the first house, followed by other tanks in a column along the side of the street. We decided that these were our tanks which had repulsed the attack on the battery and had already managed to get ahead of us. The tanks were standing with their engines running. I saw no one in the turrets of the first 2 vehicles, but there was someone in the turret of the 3rd. I called out to him. I heard an alarming reply. You. Here's some kvass for you." Nikitin, who was walking beside me, shouted and fired a shot from his nagan at the man looming above the tower. Only now I saw that I was standing near a German T4 tank. "Back into the woods." I shouted to my platoon, serenely walking on the other side of the street, and rushing back behind Nikitin, on the way shot into the blackened hole in the driver's hatch of the 2nd tank, standing next to our broken T-34. That's what it means not to send out a head patrol. My negligence could cost the squad that had already reached the edge of the forest. When I reported to Popple, who was leading the 1st Company, that there was a column of German tanks in the village, he gave the command "get back." Since the road to Taichur was cut off, Popple decided to take the men and tanks deeper into the forest to sit out the day and scout where we could break the encirclement the next night and force the Ikvia. The peasant who had left with us from Belk Milki, a local young Czech who did not want to stay with the Germans, took the task of leading the squad deep into the forest. "Will you lead us where the devils can't go?" Popple asked him, who still had not lost his sense of humour. "I will," said the Czech, and he led us along an inconspicuous forest path, familiar only to him and his old father, as he assured Popple. All the night of July 2nd we walked in pitch darkness, stumbling and falling on the rubble, falling into pits of liquid mud, bumping into the branchy and tenacious limbs of centuries-old birch bark or beech. Only at the head of the column, the guide and Popple shone one hand flashlight shyly into the ground. We followed them, as if blind, and whenever they stopped, we stopped too, huddling tightly together. The road went uphill at first, and then down and down. What a path. Popple's satisfied voice was often heard. "The devil's even better to hell." Sitnik supported him. In the morning our descent ended. We came to a large and deep forest ravine with huge trees that blocked the daylight from us. Despite the fact that the whole night was spent on the transition, the tank speedometer showed that we had gone only about 4 kilometers. The day in the detachment began with an open party meeting near the tanks. Among those gathered were not Colonel Vasiliev, Regimental Commissar Nemtsev, Senior Battalion Commissar Novikov, Lieutenant Colonel Bolkov-Ivanov, Lieutenant Colonel Volkov and many others who had died only yesterday. The scouts sent by Popple, having returned from the battlefield, reported that they had found Vasiliev's burned tank with the side of the turret broken off, But the colonel's body was not found, nor was the body of Bolkovitinov, whose tank was also burned. Only Novikov was found on his immortal battery. He died with his gun under a burned-out German tank. Popple gave us a brief update on the situation. The detachment failed to break further into the rear of the enemy to raid on his communications to reach the connection with his troops, but still the order of the front is fulfilled. In battles with us, the Germans lost more than 400 tanks, and in addition we drew away 3 of their tank divisions. We prevented the main forces of Kleist's tank army to fulfill the plan. Kleist's lightning failed. Thanks to the steadfastness of our detachment, the Red Army was able, maneuvering, to occupy new advantageous lines of defense. Now the most important task of our party organization is that the division, continuing its actions behind enemy lines, to follow the traditions of Colonel Vasiliev, not to lose the image of a military unit. Coming out of the encirclement, we must inflict on the enemy possibly more sensitive losses. According to the locals, behind us is an airfield. That's for starters and set the squad task to defeat this airfield, and you, communists and Komsomol members, must ensure the mass of fighters to fulfill this order. Finished Popple his information. The meeting of the party organization of the division decided to oblige communists and Komsomol members to strictly monitor discipline in the detachment to help the commander to collect the lone loners and wounded, as well as weapons and ammunition from the battlefield. To allocate people for reconnaissance in the direction of the raid detachment in each company to create a calculated stock of wire and wicker stretchers to drag across the water and swamps wounded, as well as those who cannot swim. The second issue was admission to the party and Komsomol. The assembly wildly applauded each guarantor when he told about the glorious military deeds of the one he recommended. We accepted into the party and Komsomol 26 fighters and commanders who distinguished themselves in battle. After the end of the party meeting, I was surprised to see a lonely sitting aside from all the chief of intelligence division. For several days I had not met him or heard anything about him. Remembering that I had not yet reported to him about Vasiliev's order to present the collective farmer Musia for a reward for his reconnaissance, I decided to do it now. After hearing my report, he looked at me with surprised, incomprehensible eyes. "Are you out of your mind? Remember that you are in German encirclement. Maybe now we'll have to take off these awards and throw them away," he said, angrily poked himself in the chest and jumped up. I went to Popple to report what had happened. The chief of intelligence beat me to it. "Comrade Brigade Commissar." He turned to Popple. "As far as I understand in the war, we are defeated and today in a trap. I no longer believe in our plans. I consider it my duty to honestly relieve you of the extra mouth." "It's an act you've long hoped for," said Popple. "Well then, go to the prosecutor and tell him," and that was the end of the conversation. The chief of intelligence left. He was accompanied by gloomy looks of the commanders who heard this conversation. A few minutes later, from behind the tanks, at which Major Sitnik burned staff documents, came a pistol shot. Major Sitnik was appointed chief of staff of our detachment, instead of the colonel, who had already been officially dismissed for inactivity and confusion. This change happened without anyone noticing it. Sitnik is in a hurry to finish preparations for the battle road before nightfall. 4 seriously wounded men who cannot be taken with them are carried to Wilka Milksu to an old Sek man in the underground. The tanks, left without a drop of fuel, are put in rows as in a park. The machine guns were removed from them and taken into the squad's armament. The gun bolts were dismantled and buried in the ground. The engines of the tanks are in disrepair. The companies are weaving stretchers and drags from vines. "I have to get ready. I have no time to write anymore. Is the point I've made now going to be the last? Well, I'm not the only one keeping a diary." On July 2nd, the detachment set out at nightfall. Our company under the command of Major Sitnik went ahead. Behind it, Geoshalono, at close distances, went the other 4 companies of the detachment. Head and rear companies were heavily armed and freed from everything that could interfere with the fight. The wounded were carried by the men of the 2nd and 3rd companies. Ahead of me were Popple and Sitnik, listening and looking warily into the darkness that engulfed the head marching guard. Not a single sound came from there. The Germans had no idea that we had left the forest. The detachment was already far away, and they persistently and methodically shelled the forest. Sometimes the silhouette of a careless side watchman glimpsed in the light of a distant gun light on the side of the ridge, and again we were covered with impenetrable darkness. The breathing of hundreds of men merged into one. It seemed as if a huge, tongueless creature, sheltered by the night, was moving through the gully. At first our guide was a young Czech from Velk Milk Seeds. On the outskirts of Turkovic Popel found a new guide, a Pole. He looked at us suspiciously for a long time and assured us that we could not pass through the Ikvia swamp to Mekko is an Edka abyss. But when he was sure that the Red Army, not the Germans in disguise, was in front of him, he gladly agreed to lead us to the Ikva swamp paths north of the village of Paicha. For 2 hours we crawled in the swampy water, scaring treacherously loud, quacking domestic ducks and geese, falling into mires, pulling each other out of them. Each squad was pulling a dragger with one wounded man behind it. At last, when we were exhausted, we came upon a dry island. It was covered with thick aspen trees, as tall as a man, and adjoined the river. The best swimmers were the first to swim, pulling the wire behind them to the eastern bank. The end of it on both sides of the river was fastened to the bushes. Having made of drags and stretchers the semblance of small ferries, we began to ferry across the river the wounded, and then in the same way all those who could not swim. No matter how much Popel hurried the soldiers, but still dawn caught us at the crossing and gave us away to the Germans. Enemy planes appeared. They began an assault, having detected us from the first approach. Luckily for us, it was raining heavily, but still my platoon suffered losses. On a hill in the swamp we buried an old soldier, a volunteer collective farmer Mizi. No sooner had the rumble of airplanes died down than our cover from the side of the village gave an alarm signal enemy tanks. Major Sitnik, having taken the first company, led it to the help of the cover. From the forest, where my platoon was running through the swamp, gunshots were heard towards us. We lay down in the swamp's edge. I wondered why the shells were bursting far behind us. I began to listen to the firing. Only I thought, what is it? It's our guns firing, as Nikitin and Gadiuka, lying next to me, almost simultaneously exclaimed joyfully. Our guns are firing. Yes, of course, ours. The bursts of shells glittered among the German armoured cars deployed for the attack, 2 kilometres away from us. There can be no mistake, I thought, and saw that my platoon, consisting of only wounded men, jumped up, rushed already to the edge of the forest, from which the guns were firing. Sorry. Ours, shouted to me soldiers. I rushed after them. At the edge between the trees the soldiers surrounded someone. When they parted to give me way, I saw Krivulia. He was covered with soot and oil, but I recognized him from afar by his dishevelled bangs and immediately thought with anxiety about the column with which he had left. What had happened? What happened? I asked him. Nothing happened, he said, and pointed at 2 BT tanks visible from under the masking branches, already ready. Barely finished, as we see someone bombed by German aviation, then these armoured cars. So we helped them with a light. As always, he spoke as if everything should be clear to me from one word. I asked him to tell me what it was all about. Very simple, he said. The thing was that 2 defective BTs from Bolkovitinov's regiment, which were in the column, were barely moving and could only be started with a tugboat. One of them, having passed the bridge, stalled and blocked the exit. While Krivulia was fiddling with it, helping to start it, the wheeled column had gone far away. Having consulted with the crews, Krivulia came to the conclusion that it would not be possible to catch up with the column on one first gear. They would have to move on their own. That's why they decided to make 2 combat-ready tanks out of 4 defective ones. Having moved away to the forest, they started to work. Rearrangement of gearboxes delayed them in the forest until we arrived. Major Sitnik, having repulsed the attack of armoured cars and motorised infantry, gave Popel the opportunity to finish the crossing and take the detachment into the forest. That's good, rejoiced Popel when I reported to him about Krivel. Gather the severely wounded in the companies and put as many as can fit on the tanks and make your way to Tarnopol. Take out the wounded and report to the corps that the detachment continues to fulfill a new combat mission. While I was selecting the wounded, the companies lined up in the clearing. Tankers stood in rows po ekipiskajno. Popple climbed up on a stack of logs. The ranks shuddered, pulled closer to him. Fellow soldiers and friends. Popple spoke quietly. Today we are marching eastward, but you will remember these paths tomorrow. We will pave the wide roads of our people's military glory to the west. May his leader, comrade Stalin, live forever. Quietly, but unceasingly long and menacingly carried over the meadow. Comrades, Popple continued, raising his fist, and without cars we will remain a formidable force. Nearby in the village of Semidubi is a German airfield. Our task is to defeat it. We'll destroy the invaders wherever we find them. Follow me, tankers. He waved his hand, and he was no longer on the dais. I lost sight of him among the company columns, which stirred and one by one moved into the forest, which had not yet shaken off the dark blanket of night. Our way was in the other direction. The wounded have already been placed on the tanks, 12 to 15 men per vehicle. Those who can't hold themselves had to be tied to the armor with ropes. People sit and lie on the armor so tightly that the tank is not visible. From the outside, it must be impossible to understand what this strange machine is clothed with so many people. Of the passengers of my tank, only the collective farmer Ignat is firmly on his feet. He has already changed into Musia's jacket and girded himself with his machine gun belt. I instructed Ignat to make sure that during the movement any of the wounded did not fall off the tank. He takes care of them like a babysitter, running around the car. One will put something under the head. Another will fill a flask with water. Now we will go on our way. Let only the column of the detachment hide in the forest. I can't go to the hospital, says Petty Officer Voron, wounded in the head. I'll go to fight with Udalov. Have a good fight. And he slips off the tank, runs behind the formation. Udalov waves to him. Hey buddy, join my platoon. Viper seems to feel offended. He silently looks after the departing. Here are the last ones. Closing the column goes rear guard. It is led by an infantryman junior lieutenant who ran into the attack behind Mazayev's battalion on the memorable morning of the battle for Tritony. My 5-kilometer route to Tarnopol is painted with landmarks: a farm, a grave, a willow tree, a yard. Ignat had been a labourer in these places for 20 years. He had travelled all the stitches and meadows. Having repeated the landmarks aloud, he concluded. Dobry Bude. Viper, who could not reconcile that his tank, covered with wounded, lost the appearance of a fighting machine, could not resist, of course. What's good? Like a mouse, we'll slip through, explained the collective farmer, who did not know the temper of our mechanic. This was enough for Gadiuchka all the way to prove to unknown to whom that absolutely obvious truth that a tank is not a mouse, especially BT-7, the engine of which shoots like a cannon when exhausted, and in general, why climb the holes? It is useless. If the roar of the engine can be heard 5 kilometers away. 2 of our tanks are going south through fields and ravines, covered with fog and drizzling rain, bypassing villages where Germans could be. In the forest to the south of the village of Grada, we stopped for a day's rest, as the rain had passed and the sky began to clear threateningly. The tanks are driven into the forest by a narrow clearing. Our observers are standing on the southern edge of the forest. Ahead the bridge and the village, we cannot pass it. On the left the river, on the right the highway, the continuous movement of German columns. At first there were no Germans in the village, except for 2 soldiers standing at the bridge, but soon the observers reported that cars and tanks had entered the village. All day long I turned the receiver hard, hoping to catch some army radio, but I did not hear a single Russian word on the air. Only in the evening someone spoke Russian with a strong Western accent in his headphones. From the first phrase, "the Soviets are fleeing," it was clear that this was German propaganda, but the announcer mentioned the Dubno district, and I decided to listen. The announcer reported with pathos that today south of Dubno, the previously encircled division of Colonel Vasiliev had been destroyed to a single man. At first this information made me laugh, but then I couldn't stand it and turned the switch with annoyance. Our situation is not such that calmly listen to this shameless lie. Strangely, but only now I realized that we were in the territory occupied by the Germans, and that our task was very little like transporting the wounded, as it seemed to us in the morning, when we stood in the clearing, seeing off the columns going into the forest. Having returned from duty on the southern edge of the forest, Viper does not find a place for himself. As a restless wanders around the car, he looks inside, then turns on the light and looks at the instruments, then tries the levers, then begins to measure the remaining fuel, although he has already done it more than once, and all the time he's shaking his head, mumbling under his breath. It's like something's tormenting him. He wants to say something, but he doesn't dare. It's so unlike the Viper. I don't know what's happening to him. In battle he felt at home, in the most critical moments could quip, sarcasm, the Durasno-tied skirmish with Nikitin, and at the same time always left the last word. But after we were left alone, he could not be recognized. Did he panic? I noticed that Krivulia, who today on the road has already more than once irritably shouted at Gadiuka for his boring cooing, now also looks at him in surprise. That's who I never cease to admire. In whatever environment we are in, everywhere it turns out that Krivulia is the most necessary person here. Just amazing he is younger than almost all of us, looks like a boy, and apparently considers himself a boy, talking about himself always somehow frivolous, but in fact many experienced soldiers can learn from him. How many times, when we needed a clever mind, skill, or just worldly practice, he helped us out. And so he is now. I was very worried that our wounded, squirming on the tanks in the most uncomfortable positions, and must have suffered terrible agony during the shaking, have no medical care. But only we stopped in the forest. As I look, Krivulia has already taken care of the wounded. Someone unbands someone, examines the wound, and by everything it is obvious that in this case he is not an ignoramus. In any case, he will replace the medical officer. We don't have any bandages or iodine. He didn't say a word about it. He took a gas bucket, siphoned gasoline from the car, and began to wash the festering wounds. You'd think he'd used gasoline and a gas bucket for medical purposes more than once. Where did he get all this stuff? Where and when did he get it all? It couldn't be that 3 months of the Finnish campaign, Krivuli's only practice at war, had given him such an advantage over us fighting for the first time. Restlessly snooping around the car, Viper caught his foot and almost knocked over a bucket of gasoline. Krivulia can't stand it. Tell me, please, what kind of moles torment you today? Come on, you've had enough. All day long you've been muttering something under your nose. Sit down, calm down. Viper obediently sits down on the wing of the car, turns away from Krivuli, continuing to wash the wounds of the soldiers lying on the tank. For several minutes the mechanic resentfully silent, and suddenly jumps up. I apologize, comrade junior political officer. I'll ask you a question. I was taught at the tractor driver's course technology decides everything. Where's our equipment? We had only fought for 10 days, and there were 2 tanks left in the division, and the same tanks were used to build ambulances. Maybe I don't understand something here, so explain it to me. Explain it to my head what will happen to the tankers now. I see that everyone is alert. The wounded raise their heads, waiting for what Krivulia will say. Do we have enough tanks in the rear so that all the machineless tankers would get new vehicles? And if not enough, what then? How will we fight further without tanks? Oh, Viper, Viper, it's not for nothing that your name is so poisonous, says Krivulia. You can't hide from yourself, Viper worries. I'm used to technology. Without equipment for me it's not war, but only misery. No, it would be better to lay down my head in battle. Whether we are wolves, we are hiding in the forest from daylight, from living people, or mice, as Comrade Kolkoznik says. And where? At home. It's sickening to think about. It's all from milk, laughs Krivulia. You've had an extra jug, that's what makes you sick. After 4 days of starvation, this morning in one farm we did not calculate the capacity of our stomachs and emptied all the jugs taken out of the cellars by kind-hearted peasant women, for which we had to pay for it on the road with tremendous suffering at every jolt of the car. From further conversation it becomes clear to me what is going on with Viper. The point is not that for Viper in the war without equipment is only torment, as he expresses, although there is a lot of truth in it, but that when we fought, everything was clear and simple. We all had one thought to fulfill our duty, and under the pressure of the situation, changing every hour, and requiring the highest tension of all human abilities, there was no time to think about what and why. But now these questions have arisen. No, Viper does not panic. He simply cannot mechanically accept what is happening as given from above. Independent of him, it is against his being he feels himself guilty, and cannot understand what his fault is. This is what torments the mechanic. That is what torments us all. Crivulia understood him thus. Without answering the poisonous question about what would happen to the tankers now, he turned the conversation to the subject that in life and in war, as in a long field, everything can happen, that the war caught us on the road, from around the corner, and yet at Dubno we beat Kleist in the face, and beat him hard. Yes, even yesterday I was saying to myself that, although in 10 days of the war we were far from the frontier, the results of the fighting were comforting for us after all. The enemy's losses at Dubno were at least twice as great as ours. If with the same results are fighting on all parts of the front, it will soon radically change the situation, I thought. But here are these 2 tanks, the last 2 tanks with which we are hiding in the woods, again raise before me a damning question. They testify with the same obviousness to the gravity of what has happened, as must be for the shipwrecked sailors, testify to the same wreckage of their ship thrown on the deserted shore. Toward evening, Nikitin, returning from his observation post, brought with him a girl who had run away from the village. From her we learned that 5 German tanks a little smaller than ours, as she said, had entered the village, and that the Germans were overdrunk, outrageous and mischievous. At first the girl was sobbing, covering her torn blouse with her hand, but not a few minutes later she was answering our questions and even flirting with Crivulia, who with a serious look convinced her that it was no accident that she had met us here, that we had only been expecting her. Crivulia immediately had a bold plan, in the realization of which this girl was to be of considerable help to us. We should take advantage of the fact that the Germans are drunk, without waiting for night, a sudden blow to break through the village and destroy the German tanks in passing. The success of this plan depended on whether we could remove the sentries standing at the bridge before they raised the alarm. We had to divert their attention. That was what the girl had to do. When Crivulia explained to her what was required of her and promised her a ride on a tank to the next village where her relatives lived, she not only agreed, but so quickly entered into her intended role, as if she had come to the forest to play it. Enthralled by the prospect of a merry adventure with the tankers, she must have forgotten that she had just escaped from the hands of the drunken Germans. It seems to me that this girl has not yet felt what is happening. For her, the Nazi is not yet a terrible enemy bringing death and devastation, but just a drunken oaf from whom you can hide in the bushes. It is painful to observe such naivety, and I have had to observe it more than once among our young compatriots in this recently Sovietized land, in these remote villages and farms, which have not yet been seriously affected by the war. "Only this," said Crivulia, when the mechanics started the engines. "Die yourself, but save your comrade from harm." I understood that he reminded the crews of the oath, not because he was afraid that they would not forget it. He wanted to cheer up the wounded, who had to break through, being unprotected from enemy fire by the armour that covered the crews. The only thing we could do was to camouflage the wounded with greenery. Here the crews tried their best. They camouflaged the wounded so well that they could not be seen even a few steps away from the tank. The girl went forward, carrying on her back a bundle of various rags, collected and tied Nikitin. When we reached the outskirts of the village, we moved out from behind a corner house. The girl was already on the bridge. What we saw made us repent of our scheme. One of the sentries was dragging the girl towards the river, probably under the bridge, and the other was pushing her. "Hurry, hurry, hurry," excitedly hurried me. "Nikitin." It was difficult to restrain and not to command Gadiuchka to increase speed, which probably would have alarmed the sentries. I was about to give the command, but suddenly I noticed the revolver that Nikitin was holding at the ready, looking out of the tower, and I realized that the most important thing now was to make less noise. This also gave me the idea of using not a machine gun, as we had thought before, but a nagant to remove the sentries. Busy with the girl, the Germans did not pay attention to the fact that our tanks were camouflaged rather strangely. When we were entering the bridge, the girl, having broken out of the German's hands, rushed towards us. Neither Nikitin nor I could not resist. We leaned out of the tower. The German, who was pursuing the girl, intercepted her at the very nose of the tank. We fired at the same time. I shot at the one who grabbed the girl, and Nikitin shot at the second, standing at the railing of the bridge and bared his teeth. Both Germans fell down, it seems dead. Nikitin, as if on wings, flew out of the tower, grabbed the girl, who sat down from fright, and threw her aft to the wounded. Back in the tower, he jumped up happy, smiling, spat on his palms and shouted, "Well, let's go for a walk, my dear, with fire." "With fire, with fire," rejoiced Viper, who, as soon as we left the forest, immediately cheered up. Our revolver shots, which sounded faintly in the roar of the engines, did not alarm anyone. A truck stood near the nearest house. A German soldier was gutting a chicken near it. Concentrated on this business, he did not even look in our direction, which deeply angered Viper. Having commanded the speed, I pointed the gun to the right, but I did not have time to aim at the target. Gadyuchka, jerkily adding gas, turned the tank and crushed the Kureda together with his car. Krivuli's tank went next to mine. The right side of the street mine, the left his. That was the agreement. But since all 5 German tanks stood on the same side of the street, on the right side, we had to divide them. The German tankers came out of the houses when one tank was already burning with bright flames. Fleeing from our machine gun fire, they rushed behind the houses into gardens and orchards. We had to get out of the village as soon as possible, but we had to delay with the last tank. For some reason it persistently did not catch fire, and Krivulia wanted to finish it at all costs. Finally, we finished with it and rushed further south, under the saving cover of the coming night. Ignat, sitting on the fender of my front car, kept turning his head. Didn't he forget the landmarks we had planned on the route? It turned out that he remembered the landmarks perfectly well, and his head was spinning because there were fields around, where he had been working for the Pans not so long ago. Right-handed. Livorich. He commands confidently at the crossroads. In his soft felt hat, so burned out that you can't tell what colour it was, in a Kurzavi tank jacket, belted and crossed with a machine gun belt, he reminds us of the Civil War partisans we saw in movies and pictures. I am amused by Gadyuchka's attitude towards him, for whom the presence of a man not in uniform on the tank seems a completely unacceptable breach of order. From his seat, Viper can't see the wing of the tank, but he can't forget for a minute that on this wing sits the picturesque figure of Ignat. "Well, how is our uncle? Has he not fallen into the ditch?" Every now and then he asks me or Nikitin over the intercom. Though Ignat has been fighting with us for about a week already, has been in reconnaissance and in battle, Gadyuchka has never once called him comrade fighter, he always called him uncle, or, as an encouragement, comrade volunteer. Ignat doesn't get these subtleties. The felt hat does not prevent him from feeling like an old soldier, who is not the first time he fights with a German. The only bad thing is that he has not yet got used to taking off his hat and bowing low, almost to the ground, at every meeting, no matter who addressed him a long life in the captivity of the Pansky, and it affects all of us unpleasantly. It was quite dark when we parted from the girl who had so unexpectedly come to our aid. After the shooting and turmoil we had caused in the village, she could not come to her senses for a long time. Nestled in the stern among the wounded, the girl shrank into a lump and looked around fearfully, like a caught animal. Nikitin and I, taking turns to climb out of the turret, or even both at once, tried in vain to convince her that the danger was over and there would be no more shooting. In reply, she only shook her head and waved her hands. But here at one crossroads Ignat commanded right-hand drive, and she immediately jumped up and, before we realized what was going on, jumped off the tank at the turn, and so deftly that both Nikitin and I almost in one voice exclaimed, "What a goat!" Waving to us, she ran towards the lights of the village, which we had to bypass by a deaf country road. Again, I was diligently turning the receiver's crank, trying to catch at least one of our army waves to find out whether the front line was still far from us. Finally, already despairing of the success of this exercise, I heard a Russian voice in the headphones, from the strength of which I determined that the speaker was no farther than 20 kilometers from us. Lev. Lion. I'm an eagle, I'm going to. He indicated the coordinates. Ours. Jumped with joy, shouted Nikitin, who listened to the second headphones. Of course ours, I said confidently, as I knew that Lion the call sign of our corps. Leading radio I did not hear, but from the responses of the Eagle realized that some unit of tanks is also coming out of the encirclement. Apparently it had been sent to look for someone, because the Eagle reported that he had not found Vasya, left his 5 boxes, and was fighting his way to Tanya, which probably meant to Tarnopol. No, even though the radio call signs are ours, this corps is not ours, I decided after listening to the transmission to the end. After all, we found the trace of our corps. It was the KB of the Corps Reconnaissance Reserve, standing alone on the side of the road, not giving any signs of life, but in all its formidable combat power. In the light of the lightning, which had been blazing all night, we recognized it at once by its high turret with a ladder. We have only 2 such vehicles, and both of them are in the Corps Reconnaissance. It was hard to believe that the crew was sleeping in the car, although it seemed to be so. It was more correct to assume that due to lack of fuel the crew had booby-trapped the tank and left it. But lowering the flashlight, I saw the tanker's corpse on the ground. Not far from him we found the corpses and the rest of the crew and several boxes of smoke bombs. Now it was clear what had happened here. I imagine the picture of the fight in which this Ilya Muromets, who was covering the withdrawal of the Corps, entered with German tanks that were attacking him like mosses on an elephant. German shells left only dents on his armor. I counted more than 24 of them. The effect of KB shells was evidenced by 4 smashed medium German tanks standing far away from him. Judging by the condition of the corpses, this battle had taken place 2 days ago. Corps reconnaissance had to be operating in the rearguard, so the Corps is already somewhere far away. There was a landmine in the KB's fighting compartment. Nikitin set the cord on fire, threw a couple of grenades, and we continued on our way. Soon I heard the Eagle again. He was going to a new frontier. Not having the Corps code, I could not determine where he was going. I realized only that there were Germans in Meshancy, and he was dispersing them. Mentally thanking the Eagle for such valuable information for us, I found this point on the map. Having consulted with Krivulia, we decided not to go to the Eagle, but to stick to our own route, parallel to his movement. Let the Eagle make noise there, and we will pass quietly, summarized our decision Krivulia. We had already begun to hear the rumble of the guns. 3 hours later we saw that the approaching flashes of shots were mostly grouped to the right and left of our direction. Oto Pravruch Blisky German at the village Chistulov and Livarich at Lozova, said Ignat, when we stopped at some hill to look around and prepare for a break through the front line. We'll take the middle and jump out to Zalaznitsa, he suggested. There was a small farm ahead. We decided to bypass it by a ravine as soon as the morning fog appeared. The rumble of gunfire to our right and left was thinning. Both crews, standing by their vehicles, looked toward Tarnopol, where something light was flashing in the blackness of the night, must be distant flashes of fire, powerless to cut through the darkness. All were silent, as if in some kind of celebration. The wounded, too, peered forward from their tanks. Those who could prepared to use a rifle or a grenade. The morning dawn did not deceive our expectation. With its appearance on the eastern horizon, the ravine began to fill with fog. When starting, the tank's Viper showed all his skill. I did not think that it was possible to start the engine of BT-7 as quietly as he did. With wet overcoats on the exhaust pipes and darkened stoplights, our tanks cautiously advanced through the winding ravine. At first we were walking in a thick fog, and nothing could be seen on the sides. Then, following the windings of the ravine, we went higher, the fog thinned, and in it the roof of a house and some kind of tower vaguely loomed up above the ravine. A human figure loomed at the edge of the ravine. Ignat answered in German to a shout that came down to us, Neen turning to me, he said quietly. I was talking to the Germans. His answer, of course, did not deceive the Germans. They ran along the ridge and shouted, Halt! Halt! Without answering the shouts, we slowly moved forward to the saving turn of the ravine. Rifle shots slammed, the red, fiery trace of a shell flew by, but we were already going down again into the thick fog. The fiery trace jabbed into a steep slope. At the bursting of the shell, I thought with joy, Hi, they won't get it. But still that shot spurred me on like a whip. Third, full throttle. I shouted to Viper, forgetting that I wanted to quietly leave the ravine, to suddenly with fire rush over the German trenches, which, as I thought, should be behind the farm. The car jumped on the bumps and potholes of the ravine. Almost next to us, overtaking us, was Krivuli's tank. In the roar of the engines I heard the clatter of a machine gun, and someone scream at the stern of the tank. And again only the familiar noise. From time to time the machine lifted off the ground and carried on, deafening us with its howl in the fog that filled the ravine to the brim. I was tossed from wall to wall, resting my hands on the tower and thinking with a pleading thought in my soul, I wish I had not fallen into the pit. At that time there were shouts at the stern of the tank. Stop! Stop! I realized that one of the wounded fell overboard. Having stopped the vehicle, we jumped out of it with the whole crew. Krivulia also stopped his tank, came side to side and, turning the turret gun back, prepared to cover us with fire, although beyond the stern of the machine could not see anything in the fog. When we picked up the fallen man, we made sure that he was already dead. A bullet had pierced his head. Among the wounded on the tank was another killed and one slightly hit by a bullet. The firing stopped. There were no signs of the front around. Suddenly 2 shells whistled above us, one after another. They're hitting us, shouted Krivulia from the turret of his car so loudly and joyfully that Nikitin grabbed my hand and we froze, not understanding what had happened. The meaning of his words reached us only after we heard a lazy call. Who's coming? Stop! This shout was covered by the rolling laughter of Krivuli. That's how Igor jumped up on the hillock. Laughed Krivulia. You ask who's coming, and here, brother, we've already passed by. Everyone realized at once that we had passed the German front line, and Krivulia's joke was answered with a friendly, merry, hearty laughter. At the repeated shouting, in which it was felt that the man was only performing a boring formality, I, laughing, asked, Hey, what are you doing up there? As what, holding the defence, replied the man. This answer caused an even more friendly explosion of laughter. Good defence, Krivulia said angrily as he jumped out of his tower. Leaving Krivulia at the vehicles, I went upstairs and went with this fighter to the command post of his battalion. I hoped to clarify the situation there and to find out which road to take to the city, so as not to run into a minefield. I found the battalion commander sitting in a knee-deep trench on the slope of a hillock. He was apparently struggling with sleep. The rest of the battalion commanders were sleeping in the same small trenches, of which there were a dozen on the slope of the heights. Ah, tankers. So we will fight, because I thought to roll back further. The commander rejoiced when he saw me. Having learned that we broke through with the wounded from near Dubno and headed for Tarnopol, looking for the Corps headquarters, he waved his hand disappointedly. What Corps headquarters are there for you when I, the commander, 3 days do not know where the headquarters of our regiment? To my question about the minefields, he replied, grinning. You can go quietly. There are no mines. I did not like the tone of this combat, and I said that we could calmly pass its front edge if we did not have to stop to pick up a fallen from the tank. No one even fired a shot. So what of it? He said. There is no need for barriers along the ravines now. Now only ours go through the ravines, and the Germans drive cars on the roads. You can't drag him into a ravine with a harness. And what's a ravine got to do with it, when there's not a single soldier on my right all the way to the railroad? Yesterday there was a company there, but by evening it left to cover the highway to Proskurov. Now he spoke as if I were to blame for this, becoming more and more agitated, and finished with an unexpectedly indifferent, tired grin. "And you are talking to me about some ravine. Such a mood is news to me. Of course, if you believe the commander, his situation was grave. All night long he listened to the German machines buzzing on the left from the side of Lozovaya, and now he waits that the enemy is about to go on the offensive, bypass him on the right and cut him off from the city. But this indifferent grin I cannot understand. At Dubno we saw people who succumbed to a sense of fear, confused, but in the general mass who fought with unwavering steadfastness and tenacity, with true greatness, inspiring confidence even in timid souls, they were dust particles, which you brush off so that they do not stain you and forget, and this more dangerous it rust. Combat showed me the order, hastily written to him by someone on a piece of paper stubbornly hold the line, and with the same indifferent grin that finally pissed me off said, "And the line is 4 kilometers per battalion with 1 gun. Yes, the provision is weak, you can hardly hold it without desire and labour," I answered and left without saying goodbye. All the way to Tarnopol, Colonel Vasiliev stood before my eyes as if alive, as he remained in my memory forever, exactly fused with the tank turret, with a flag in his hand, staring forward towards the lava of German tanks bearing down on us. Did he know that he was going to counterattack for the last time? When addressing us, he said, "The honour of the fatherland is our honour. Those who fought with him and saw his death will never have to be reminded of this again." We entered Tarnopol at sunrise and the rumbling of artillery cannonade. On the outskirts near the highway, in the gardens stood 5 tanks, around which people were bustling. Here I also saw a repair car. Only we rejoiced when we recognized that these were tanks of our corps, but we were cruelly disappointed. The foreman of the repair flyer said that the corps had left on June 29th on the road to Proskurov, and he was left here only to collect the defective tanks stuck in the city. We had nothing else to do but to look for the army headquarters. The petty officer said that some big headquarters was in a village near Volochisk, and asked me to bring 3 of his tanks that could go on their own, to hand them over to the headquarters to be sent for repairs. I agreed, and we moved through the city towards Volochisk. The flow of cars, submarines and people could not fit in the narrow, half-destroyed streets, studded with shingles of broken roofs, obstructed, like barriers, by telegraph poles from which hung broken wires. No fire could be seen, but it seemed to be burning on all sides, and the city was full of smoke. Stopping at one of the intersections, we saw several armed horsemen stamping their bare heels on unsaddled horses. The riders trotted along the sidewalk, overtaking the military column. They wore vests over their long-sleeved homespun shirts and city hats with soft, wide-brimmed brim. Ignat waved to them and jumped off the wing of the tank. The horsemen stopped. After talking to them, Ignat returned embarrassed. "Those are our boys," he said. I realized that Ignat was drawn to his own, and replied that we have only to thank him for his invaluable help. "They're calling us to ourselves. We'll go to the Fox," he said, as if apologizing. "Oh, I greet you," exclaimed Viper, sticking out of his hatch. "Dobre, dobre, uncle, go to the partisans." Saying goodbye to the crew of both tanks and the wounded, Ignat shook hands with each of them. Then, taking off his hat, he bowed to everyone, put his rifle behind his back, and with the help of one of the horsemen climbed onto the rump of his horse. I don't know where they went or how they imagined the partisan struggle with the Germans, but at once I felt as if I had dropped a heavy stone hanging on me after an unpleasant conversation with the commander. Only, having turned the corner, we entered the central street, as the turbulent stream of cars and submarines moving along it suddenly began to freeze, to swell, as if something happened in front of us, blocked the road. For a moment it seemed that the stream was about to rush back, sweeping away and breaking everything, but it gradually subsided in some slow, incomprehensible cycle. The artillery commander, riding on horseback beside my tank, squeezed forward, risking to be crushed, as the vehicles moved in tighter and tighter, pushing the rushing people off the sidewalk and sidewalks, squeezing them up, forcing them to jump on the steps, clinging to the sides. Before I realized what was going on, I could no longer see the cars or the cargo filling their bodies. Everything was hidden by the crowd of thousands. It rose above the stream of cars and stood still, heads outstretched in a strange silence, which seemed to be unbroken by the rumble of cannonades and explosions. Suddenly I heard a familiar voice with a soft, inimitably kind intonation come out of the wheeze of the loudspeaker hanging on the balcony. If the best divisions of the German fascist army have been defeated by our Red Army, it means that Hitler's fascist army will be defeated as Napoleon's and Wilhelm's armies were defeated. In vain Nikitin and I, hanging down from the turret, and Gadiuchka almost completely falling out of his front hatch, strained our ears, but it was impossible to catch any other whole phrase, although this voice, bursting out of the cramped radio room, like a wave of the surf overwhelming the burning city, and like a magnet, attracting to itself the many-headed, frozen-on-the-street living stream, covered the rumble of the cannonade. We, without moving, continued to listen avidly, catching separate words, suddenly coming clearly and distinctly, as if the speaker was very near, somewhere behind the wall of the house, or even on the balcony. Can you smell it? Every now and then Viper addresses us from below with such a satisfied look, as if every word of the leader, which reaches us, confirms what our mechanic told us long ago, but we didn't believe him then, doubted him, and now we should feel ashamed. I noticed the same thing in the expression on the faces of many people around us, triumphantly exchanging glances with each other, impatiently searching with their eyes for someone in the crowd who should be shamed. But there is no one to be shamed. Everyone looks around with a satisfied look. Fedka shouts loudly to someone, a Red Army soldier, leaning out of the driver's cab of a 3-ton truck ahead of us. What did I tell you? I am worried that people have heard something else very important that I missed. I want to shout, to ask what did Comrade Stalin say? But it seems to me that the most important thing I heard, and I also catch myself looking for someone to look at with a joyful look, to say, we were right. Well, of course, it can't be otherwise, it's clear. Nikitin answers me silently, with that feeling of confidence in everything he does, which before the fight in the skirmishes with Viper he expresses with his usual good-natured athlete's smile, as if to say I can see more from the tower than you can from your bottom crevice. I look around, looking for Krivulia. I can't see him in the turret of the second tank. Only one turret man is pulling out of it, putting his ear forward. I don't know where Krivulia is. He's not sitting down there, is he? I saw him when the broadcast was over and the stream frozen in the street was stirring. Coming out from behind a truck, shining with a dishevelled bangs, he jumped aboard my tank and shouted in my ear, "Forward for our victory." It turned out that he had somehow managed to get to the very mouthpiece and listened to almost the entire program of the recording of yesterday's speech of Comrade Stalin. Well, what? I asked. I already said forward for our victory and alarmists should be taken by the scruff of the neck. The meaning of the speech is as follows.